"At sunset, did you look at Sir Isaac?" Witness replied, "I did. And now upon your conscience, sir, by the virtue of your oath, in what state were the stockings?" Answer, "In statu quo ante bellum." It seems Sir Isaac had fought through the whole battle of a long day, so trying a campaign to many people. He had traversed the whole sandy Zara without calling, or needing to call, at one of those fountains, stages, or mansiones, by which, according to our former explanation, Providence has relieved the continuity of arid soil, which else disfigures that long dreary level. Mansiones, the halts of the Roman legions, the stationary places of repose which divided the marches, were so called. This happens to all. But was dinner not dinner, and did supper become dinner, because Sir Isaac Newton ate nothing at the first, and threw the whole day's support upon the last? No, you will say, a rule is not defeated by one casual deviation, nor by one person's constant deviation. Everybody else was still dining at 2, though Sir Isaac might not. And Sir Isaac himself on most days no more deferred his dinner beyond 2 than he sate with one stocking off. But what if everybody, Sir Isaac included, had deferred his substantial meal until night, and taken a slight refection only at 2? The question put does really represent the very case which has happened with us in England. In 1700, a large part of London took a meal at 2 p.m., and another at 7 or 8 p.m. In 1839, a large part of London is still doing the very same thing, taking one meal at 2, and another at 7 or 8. But the names are entirely changed. The 2 o'clock meal used to be called dinner, and is now called luncheon. The 8 o'clock meal used to be called supper, and is now called dinner. Now, the question is easily solved, because upon reviewing the idea of dinner, we should perceive that time has little or no connection with it, since, both in England and France, dinner has traveled, like the hand of a clock, through every hour between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. We have a list, well attested, of every successive hour between these limits having been the known established hour for the royal dinner table within the last 350 years. Time, therefore, vanishes from the equation. It is a quantity as regularly exterminated as any algebraic problem. The true elements of the idea are evidently these: 1. That dinner is that meal, no matter when taken, which is the principal meal, i.e., the meal on which the day's support is thrown. 2. That it is the meal of hospitality. 3. That it is the meal, note with reference to both numbers 1 and 2, in which animal food predominates. 4. That it is that meal which, upon necessity arising from the abolition of all but one, would naturally offer itself as the one. Apply these 4 tests to prandium. How could that meal answer to the first test as the day's support, which few people touched? How could that meal answer to the second test as the meal of hospitality, at which nobody sate down? How could that meal answer to the third test as the meal of animal food, which consisted exclusively and notoriously of bread? Or to the fourth test of the meal, entitled to survive the abolition of the rest, which was itself at all times in practice? Tried, therefore, by every test, prandium vanishes. But we have something further to communicate about the same prandium. 1. It came to pass by a very natural association of feeling that prandium and genticulum in the latter centuries of Rome were generally confounded. The result was inevitable. Both professed the same basis, both came in the morning, both were fictions, hence they were confounded. The fact speaks for itself. Breakfast and luncheon never could have been confounded. But who would be at the pains of distinguishing two shadows? In a gambling house of that class, where you are at liberty to sit down to a splendid banquet, anxiety probably prevents your sitting down at all. But if you do, the same cause prevents your noticing what you eat. So of the two pseudo meals of Rome, they came in the very midst of the Roman business, viz., from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Nobody could give his mind to them had they been of better quality. There lay one cause of their vagueness, viz., in their position. Another cause was the common basis of both. Bread was so notoriously the predominating feature in each of these prelusive banquets, that all foreigners at Rome, who communicated with Romans through the Greek language, knew both the one and the other by the name of Greek artositos, or the bread repast. Originally, this name had been restricted to the earlier meal, but a distinction without a difference could not sustain itself, and both alike disguised their emptiness under this pompous quadrisyllable. In the identity of substance, therefore, lay a second ground of confusion. And then, thirdly, even as the time, which had ever been the sole real distinction, there arose from accident a tendency to converge. For it happened that while some had gentaculum but no prandium, others had prandium but no gentaculum. A third party had both. A fourth party, by much the largest, had neither. Out of which varieties, who would think that a nonentity could be cut up into so many somethings, arose a fifth party of compromisers, who, because they could not afford a regular coena, and yet were hospitably disposed, fused the two ideas into one, and so, because the usual time for the idea of a breakfast was 9 to 10, and for the idea of a luncheon 12 to 1, comprised the rival pretensions by what diplomists call a mezzo-termine, bisecting the time at 11 and melting the two ideas into one. But by this merging the separate times of each, they abolished the sole real difference that had ever divided them. Losing that, they lost all. Perhaps as two negatives make one affirmative, it may be thought that two layers of moonshine might coalesce into one pancake, and two Barmecide banquets might compose one poached egg. Of that the company were the best judges, but probably, as a rump and dozen in our land of wagers is construed with a very liberal latitude as the materials, so Marshall's invitation, to take bread with him at 11, might be understood by the Greek sunetoi as significant of something better than Greek artositos. Otherwise, in good truth, moonshine and turn out, at 11 a.m. would be even worse than tea and turn out, at 8 p.m., which the fervida juventus of young England so loudly detests. But however that might be, in this convergement of the several frontiers, and the confusion that ensued, one cannot wonder that, whilst the two bladders collapsed into one idea.